In this video, we're going to cover the steps that you need to take right now if you plan on starting a family at some point in the future. Whether that's a few years away or next month, this video will guide you through the best ways to set up your finances for that new addition to the family. First step, establish control of your personal finances. This one's really important. Before you even start a family, you need to get your personal finances in order. If you skip this step and then just focus on saving for your future children, you'll end up hurting your family finances even more. Focus on establishing good habits ahead of time and clean up any necessary issues right now. And this first starts through establishing financial freedom and getting out of that paycheck to paycheck cycle. You get rid of your high interest debt, and then you aren't constantly spending your money on things that you can't afford or even pay off until your next paycheck. That's paycheck to paycheck. It's truly a lifestyle in which you barely have enough cash to make it to your next paycheck, or even go into credit card debt to get between those paydays. This isn't limited to those with low salaries either. Even people with high salaries can find themselves living paycheck to paycheck, even if they're aware of their financial choices. Get out of this cycle before you have kids, because speaking from experience here, your expenses will absolutely go up when you have that child. In another video that we'll link below, we go through a 7-step process to get out of this cycle and establish financial freedom in more in depth. Build that cash buffer and emergency savings. In general, you should hold enough cash to do 3 things: cover unexpected emergencies, pay for your monthly expenses, and then meet any short-term goals. A good emergency fund should contain between 3 to 6 months worth of expenses, so you'll be covered in the event of a job loss or a large unexpected expense like a car repair or medical problem. To figure out this number, total up what you spend in an average month, and then use that as your starting point. Having a solid emergency fund can keep you out of debt if something large comes up. That way, you won't need to put something on a credit card that you can't even pay off in time. Set your emergency fund aside in some kind of savings account. Ideally, you should pick an account that earns more interest than what you get in your checking account. For my daily expenses, I like having at least a couple months worth of cash in my checking account or my main bank account. That way, if I have a ton of expenses one month, I don't have to worry about digging into that savings account or having enough cash in my standard checking account. Personally, I don't really use my checking account for daily use as I use credit cards for everything. But it's always nice to have a good cash buffer there. So when we talk about cash buffer, that's what we're talking about. And then you also want to have enough cash on hand for short-term goals. I define short-term as anything within 3 to 5 years. So for example, if you're saving up to go on a big vacation next year, you probably don't want to take any market risks with those savings and invest those funds. That way, you're going to feel confident that short-term market fluctuations won't cause you to come up short when it's time to book your flights and hotels. Think about it this way. If the market dropped 10% this year, how would you feel about taking that vacation? Probably not as good as before, right? Don't invest that money, keep it in savings. On the flip side, invest as much as you can to take advantage of compounding. Any funds in excess of that cash buffer and emergency savings that we just talked about, you should invest for the long term. Investing is where you can really start to build your wealth by making your money work for you. When thinking about what to invest in, for younger investors, it can make sense to have the majority of your investments in low-cost ETFs, broadly diversified across the global market. If you want to take on more risk and buy some cryptocurrency or individual stocks, that totally makes sense, so I get that. Just make sure before you do that you understand that the more you veer away from that diversified, boring, low-cost investment strategy, which is the classic model of investing, and into higher risk investments, the greater chance you might lose money. Investing is all about understanding the risk versus reward relationship, and no two people have the same risk tolerance. It's important to understand that. With investing, quite possibly the biggest factor here though is time. The younger you are, the more time you have to let your investments compound and grow. Don't put off investing your extra savings until next week or next month or next year. Every day you sit on the sidelines, you might miss out on some long-term returns. Before we get to the next point, hit that subscribe button and then turn on notifications as well so you'll get notified every time we release a new video. Our content is all about helping you build wealth. Next, after focusing on your personal finances, you should then focus on saving for your children. Most people focus on the cost of college, but there's also some other big milestones that you can save for. And you can start this before the child arrives. So let's start with that pre-college education or cash buffer that you want to build up. According to the US Department of Agriculture, it will cost an estimated $272,049 to raise a child that is born in 2022 all the way to 18. If you only focus on saving for that college cost, you might not properly save for all the bigger costs in between them. And it starts with housing. Housing is considered the largest expense associated with the cost of raising children. This includes mortgage or rent payments, taxes, insurance, repairs, utilities, maintenance, and basic household goods. Speaking from experience here, you can't live in a one-bedroom apartment, or I should say it's just hard to do with a child, and especially if both of you are working remotely. It just doesn't work, so consider that a necessary extra expense might be getting bigger housing. After housing, food tends to be a major cost for parents who are raising one or more growing children, right? This number can vary depending on the geographic region and overall household size, so I'd suggest you just factor this in accordingly. There are certainly some ways to cut costs on food, but not all of those are necessarily safe, so I'll leave that up to you. Childcare costs are another large expense for families. For example, residents of Washington, D.C. pay the most for childcare at about $24,243 annually for infants. Infant care costs represent about 29% of median family income for the D.C. area. It's almost 1/3 of the average income. Meanwhile, parents in Mississippi pay the least for childcare annually, which costs about $5,400 for an infant. No matter where you live, this will likely take up a large portion of your increased spending. You should factor these extra expenses into the cash buffer and emergency savings and start planning now. And then you have college, right? The biggest expense that we all think about. A 529 plan is the great tool here. It's a tax-advantaged savings plan designed to help you pay for your children's education. State-sponsored 529 plans, which are named after the section of the IRS tax code that created them, offer tax incentives to encourage families to set funds aside for their children's secondary education expenses. Although these plans are authorized at the federal level, each state offers its own version of the plan. Families can typically participate in any state's 529 plan, regardless of where they live, offering an opportunity to select the plan that best suits their needs. Now, there are two main types of 529 plans. That's the savings plan and then the prepaid tuition plan. Savings plans grow tax deferred, and withdrawals are tax-free if they're used for qualified education expenses. On the other hand, prepaid tuition plans allow the account owner to pay in advance for tuition at designated colleges and universities, locking in the cost at today's rate. 529 plans are also referred to as qualified tuition programs and Section 529 plans. 529 plans come complete with federal tax advantages too. For example, although your contributions are made with after-tax dollars, earnings grow federal tax-free in the account. As long as withdrawals are used for qualified educational expenses at an eligible institution, you will not pay additional federal taxes when you take distributions. This is kind of similar to the Roth IRA. You fund the account with post-tax funds, it's already been taxed, and then you don't pay taxes on the earnings when withdrawn for qualified reasons. When comparing this to a standard brokerage account, the tax savings can be significant, so don't overlook this account. You can use these funds to pay for qualified higher education expenses, which may include tuition, room and board, and books. And like a retirement account, a 529 plan has tax advantages that allow you to keep more of your savings. Insurance. When you have children, you have a newfound responsibility in providing financially for that child. If you were to pass away, you might want to be able to still provide for your children at least through the age of 18. This is where life insurance comes in. A life insurance policy is a contract between you and an insurance company. In exchange for regular payments, called premiums, the insurer pays out monthly after you die. This payment goes to the people you choose as beneficiaries, which is usually your children, a spouse, or other family members. It can be an important safety net if anyone depends on you financially. Beneficiaries can then use the money to repay debts, replace your income, or provide funds for future expenses like college tuition. There are two types of life insurance policies. First one, term life insurance. Term life insurance works by covering you for a limited period of time, such as 10, 15, or 20 years. You can choose a term length that matches your needs, and if you die within the term, your beneficiaries receive the payout. Ideally, by the time the term ends, you no longer need life insurance, as your house will be paid down, your kids will be grown up, and you'll have enough money saved up to go to them. Term life policies are often the cheapest type of coverage, as they don't build any type of cash value, but instead are meant to cover the loss of income for the beneficiaries if that person dies within that term. The other type is permanent life insurance. Permanent life insurance costs more than term, but offers additional features like a cash value account, which can grow over time. Now, whole life insurance is the best known type of permanent life, but other types include universal life, variable, and variable universal. Permanent coverage can provide money for your heirs, regardless of when you die. In the event of your death, you want to consider that the policy would cover these expenses: outstanding debts such as mortgages, personal loans, or credit card balances; everyday living expenses, including childcare, utility bills, groceries, and car insurance; future expenses like funeral costs and college tuition; and just another general way to build wealth long term. Estate planning. This one's important. This starts with the last will and testament. Consider this your final wishes for your possessions, dependents, and arrangements. This one is especially important if you have any valuable assets like money or real estate and want to specify where they go. It's also important if you have children or pets, so you can designate who you'd want to look after them. It also can include how you want your assets divided who gets what in what portion of your assets, special wishes, or other designations like charitable donations. If you set up a full estate plan, then this will be part of that. Designating your beneficiaries. When you can specify what happens to your financial assets in a will, one major exception is that in most cases, if you specified a beneficiary on a specific account, which is most common with retirement accounts and insurance policies, that designation will take precedence over your will. In many cases, we set these up when we first open the account, and then we don't look at it again. So make sure to double check that you have the right beneficiary specified on each of your assets. Guardianship. A guardian is an individual to whom a judge or a will gives the legal responsibility to care for a child or an adult who does not have the capacity for self-care. The appointed individual is often responsible for both the care of the ward, which is the child or incapable adult, and the person's financial affairs. A guardianship is similar to a power of attorney in that both empower an agent to make legal, financial, and/or medical decisions for another person. An individual can choose to whom they give the power of attorney and under what circumstances, while a guardian is court appointed and the individual may not have any say over the guardianship. You should set this up as part of your estate plan so that your children will have proper caretakers in the event of your death. This also applies to any pets as well. If you want to learn more about in-depth estate planning, we'll have another video on that topic linked below. This is Tony from Wealthfront. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.